Hello and welcome. You're watching To The Point. 24 hours after the verdict from Maharashtra and Haryana, some of the deeper and wider messages hidden in that result are now becoming apparent. Together, they suggest a significant, if not radical, shift in Indian politics. Over the next 1 hour, I shall focus on these subterranean but tectonic shifts. Are national parties edging out regional parties? Is identity politics giving way to the politics of aspiration? And is the BJP now established as the dominant national party? Those are some of the questions we shall answer in this special episode. And now to discuss the deeper outcome of yesterday's election verdict, I'm joined by the National Affairs Editor of The Telegraph, Manani Chatterjee, the Editorial Advisor of the India Today Group, Shekhar Gupta, the Executive Editor of Headlines Today, Javed Ansari, the well-known Mint columnist Akar Patel, the Chairman of APCA, Badshah Sen, and the Opinion Editor of the Indian Express, Vandita Mishra. Let's start with the changes in Indian politics discernible within Maharashtra and Haryana before we come to the wider pan-Indian changes. Shekhar Gupta, with the NCP unconditionally supporting the BJP from outside and the Shiv Sena unlikely to oppose even if they don't end up securing a coalition, Mr. Modi effectively has the support of 226 MLAs in the Maharashtra Assembly, which is 78% of the total. So even if in the end he forms a minority government, would you say it's in a position where it could be unusually powerful and strong?
I think the smartest thing he can do is to form a minority government, because why should he concede any ground to Shiv Sena? I think eventually Shiv Sena will join the government, but right now if they don't want to, they don't want to, because he can hold this trial of strength. It's impossible that Shiv Sena will vote against him with Congress party and try and bring down his government.
Which is what I meant, that whether he has an alliance with them or not, both NCP and Shiv Sena are committed one way or another to supporting him. So he's actually in quite a powerful position.
Yes, absolutely. Particularly after NCP has taken this position, because in any case Shiv Sena can't go away, because Shiv Sena's power and frankly money, everything comes from its control over Bombay Municipal Corporation, Brihan Mumbai Municipal Corporation.
And that is where they need Mr. Modi.
Partnership with BJP, yes.
Akar Patel, one critical question, I suppose, is how long can the NCP's unconditional support to the BJP be taken for granted? But would you say that given the battering the NCP has suffered in Pune, the way its vote share as well as the seats it's won has diminished in its stronghold of Western Maharashtra, and most importantly perhaps its fear of prosecution from the many scams it faces, that put together all of this allows one to take a safe bet that the NCP A wants to keep the BJP happy and B is likely to support the BJP right through those 5 years?
I don't think it's done that badly. It's got about 17% of the vote share, which is what it's held on to for the last 15 years. I think,
except
broadly
it almost
speaking,
doubled the number of, but hasn't that become the result because it's doubled the number of seats it's fought?
It has to some extent, but we must see also the fact that it didn't contest those seats that the Congress held on to. The Congress and the NCP have the same vote base in Maharashtra essentially. It's a base that consists of Marathas, backward castes, Muslims, and that has remained unchanged for 15 years. I don't think the result would have been particularly different had the Congress and the NCP been together in terms of vote share. I think.
In which case, what's your answer to my wider question? How much for granted can the BJP take the NCP's unconditional offer of support? Are you saying that in fact you can't take it for granted for all 5 years? There'll be question marks after a year or two?
5 years is a very long time. I think the reason that the NCP has done what it has is that it sees the Congress decaying across the country, and I don't think its partnership with that party at the center and at the state makes sense at the moment. I think it needs the Congress to rethink what it's doing. If there is a monument to the stupidity and the hubris of the Congress, it is this result in Maharashtra. It should have conceded to the NCP's 5 or 7 seat extra demand, and you would not have seen what you had today. Yeah. I think between the Congress and the NCP, they've got 34% of the vote. The BJP has 28%.
Forgive me, that's a different issue to the one I asked you. I'm asking you the question about the NCP's position today, and therefore whether you can take NCP support for BJP for granted, and for what length of period. You're suggesting to me...
Not for 5 years, certainly. What I would say is that they would if the BJP were to form a minority government, which I think also that they will, I think the NCP will sit by the sidelines and wait for things to unfold. A couple of years at least, I think the government would be safe.
Okay, this is very interesting. Shekhar was almost categoric that it would be sensible for the BJP to form a minority government. Why take the risk of having to ally with an awkward party like the Shiv Sena, who makes endless demands and usually very difficult demands? On the other hand, you've got Akar Patel arguing that maybe a year or two is the most you can take the NCP support for granted. After that, you simply can't tell what will happen. Now, Modi is a risk taker, and he's shown a capacity to take many astute risks that analysts were actually somewhat perturbed by. What do you think he'll do in this situation? Take a risk and do what Shekhar advises, or be suddenly cautious, which looks out of character?
No, if he doesn't choose one over the other, he's not being cautious. He's just being very smart. He'll do what the UPA did. They had Mulayam Singh on one side, Mayawati on the other, and they kept balancing the two. This way, even if he forms a minority government, he will have ensured maximum support for his government. You will have the NCP from outside, the Shiv Sena from outside, and the Congress at least for a year not in a position to do anything. So I think the smart thing for him to do would be not to form the government, not take anybody's support, not allow them to join the government, wait for things to unfold, and the NCP's support will continue till as long as things either don't go too badly or till they don't start turning the heat on all those corruption cases against the
We're coming to a consensus where my three guests, and I'll come to Vandita in a moment's time, actually agree with your advice.
In fact, it's more linear than that, in the sense that even if NCP were to withdraw tomorrow, he can defy the Shiv Sena to bring down his government. If Shiv Sena outvotes his government, brings it down, in the next election, Shiv Sena will be lucky to cross two figures.
So all the cards are actually in Mr. Modi's hand.
Absolutely.
Does that also then lead to the conclusion I began with, that he can be very powerful even though a minority?
Both Shiv Sena and NCP have played their cards wrong in this election. It's just that NCP has been quicker to acknowledge it.
But then does this lead to the conclusion I began by putting to you, that even though he's a minority, technically, he can be a very powerful minority and he can do virtually what he wants?
Yes, because of the two other parties with chunks of seats, one cannot afford to bring him down. The other would love to be
part of him.
If not part of him, at least to be important for him.
And both of that together gives him so much security that he can be very powerful if he wants.
NCP in Maharashtra has almost never been out of power.
Okay. Vandita Mishra, let's then look a little deeper at the way people have voted in Maharashtra. With the Shiv Sena's hold over the Marathi Manus considerably weakened, with the INLD's hold over Jats in Haryana equally weakened, do you agree that both in Haryana and Maharashtra, one of the deeper messages that has emerged from this election is that caste-based identity politics is giving way to the BJP's appeal of good governance and development?
I think you could say that. It has reached a saturation point and it has to now combine in new ways with governance. I don't think caste and identity politics will ever be written off or go out of the reckoning, but the combination between caste and identity politics and governance has to be renegotiated by regional, particularly by regional parties. But what is also interesting in the way that people seem to have voted in Maharashtra and Haryana is that they seem to have voted for the party that assures them of stability at the center as well. The connection between the state government and the central government has been quite important in the voters' mind. You know, the Indian Express is carrying a post-poll survey conducted by the CSDS, which will appear in the paper tomorrow, which says that close to 40% of the voters in Haryana said that having the same government in the center and in the state is good for the overall development of the state. So this, I think, is a trend to watch out for, because it reverses the process of separation of the two, you know, the regional parties and regional governments and the government at the center, which was actually which was a process that gained momentum in the 90s and has continued by and large into the 2000s.
Absolutely.
So that may be reversing now.
Absolutely. What you're suggesting is that the balance between regional parties and national parties is changing, and is changing in favor of national parties for a variety of reasons. I'll come to that in a moment's time, because it's an issue, I think, that is another deeper message from Haryana and Maharashtra that I want to go into with some degree of substance and depth. But for a moment, Akar Patel, let's just stick with this business of identity politics giving way to aspirational politics or developmental politics. If the BJP were to choose a non-Jat chief minister from Haryana and a Brahmin from Maharashtra, and both of those are being at least speculated about very seriously, will that once again reinforce the trend which suggests that identity politics is diminishing, that aspirational or developmental politics is slowly, steadily taking its place?
To some extent, I think the BJP sees itself and the Nagpur Brahmins as the natural rulers of that state. I think you will have a Fadnavis in charge after a couple of centuries. Nana Sahib died in 1800, I think. I think the Jat thing will be a little more tricky. The BJP tends in those parts of the country to be primarily an upper caste party. If you look at the Punjab assembly, for instance, it's mainly the Jats who go to the Sikh or the Akali Dal. What the BJP has is mainly the upper caste, Brahmins, Baniyas, that sort of thing. In Haryana, to not have a Jat CM will be tricky for the BJP, I think, and I think that for Mr. Modi to impose his dominance as he has in Gujarat by putting somebody he nominates rather than somebody from the caste framework might be a little troublesome in the future.
So if I can interpret your answer, what you're saying is that there is a steady development away from identity politics towards what I call aspirational, but it's patchy, it's not linear, it has zigs and zags.
Sorry for speaking in such complex terms, but I think in Maharashtra it will not be a problem to have a Chitpavan Brahmin like a Fadnavis in charge.
Okay.
I think in Haryana it will be slightly problematic. But overall, Mr. Modi's charisma, his dominance over his party means that it's the people he nominates, whatever caste they may be, into power. And I don't think that the caste at the end will be that much of a problem.
Now, Vandita Mishra, writing in your paper today, Sudhindra Kulkarni says, and I want to quote him, the shift of Dalit votes in favor of BJP, both in Maharashtra and Haryana, marks a significant socio-cultural transformation. Young and educated Dalits who want to be part of the aspirational middle class of India are disenchanted with traditional Dalit leaders. And then he goes on to say that they voted in large numbers for the BJP, which he says suggests an end to Dalit exclusivism. Would you agree with that analysis?
I think we've seen this before. This is not just something that has come out of the Haryana and Maharashtra election. We saw it in UP as well, where a large section of the Dalit vote in the Lok Sabha elections went to the BJP. But the reasons for that are complex. It could be that the Dalit starts voting as a Hindu. It could also be that the Dalit is breaching that barrier or reaching out to the BJP because the Dalit has become more aspirational and the BJP seems to be the party that offers change and hope for upward mobility. But at one time, for instance, Nitish Kumar had seen this change happening in Bihar, and he combined an appeal to identity as well as the developmental promise in wonderful ways. But then he was pushed back, one electoral defeat, and he seemed to go back to the trenches. So these are changes that are happening on the ground, but whether they are going to endure or not also depends on what kind of leadership response comes, whether the parties and leaders can sense these changes and either take them forward or give more momentum to them.
So if I can interpret what you're saying that these are trends that have been there for a while. They've been noticed in Bihar, except that they didn't go as far as you thought. They are being noticed once again in Haryana and Maharashtra, but you're not sure how much they'll endure. But the fact that they've happened so significantly in Maharashtra and in Haryana, does that suggest that they're getting a little firmer, that they're becoming more part of a new politics?
I think there is a new politics, and this new politics has the signs of this new politics, messages of this new politics have come to us from various states. It was Bihar in 1995 and 2000, in 2000 and 2005. In fact, again in 2010.
Okay.
We have seen this in UP, we have seen this in Haryana and Maharashtra. But as I said, Bihar also shows that these changes could be reversible if leaders cannot respond to them or hold on to their response to them.
Let me bring you in at this point. You've been hearing the discussion, Manani, and we're talking about the way in which the vote and the message from Haryana and Maharashtra suggests that traditional caste-based, identity-based politics is giving way to something more aspirational, something more conditioned by development. And one of the things I quoted to Vandita was Sudhindra Kulkarni saying that the manner in which Dalits have voted significantly, both Haryana and Maharashtra, is a suggestion that there is a new politics emerging. She agrees with it. Do you?
No, I heard what she said, and I would agree with her that this is not a linear, a linear, irreversible process. It comes in waves. And to say that caste politics is not about development is also wrong. I think you would not have had the phenomenon of Nitish Kumar without the Lalu period.
Is the emphasis between the two or the balance between the two changing?
It's changing, but because political parties have also responded to it. I mean, the BJP of what used to be the Jan Sangh, or even the BJP in the 80s and the BJP of today, the BJP also went into a lot of what was called social engineering and social justice, Govindacharya and the
But
80s.
now you're sketching a chicken and egg situation. Which comes first, the mood of the people changing or the parties changing in response?
No, I think both. I think that is the great dynamism of Indian politics, that the Dalits feel or the OBCs feel that the BJP, there is space for them, and the very fact that Mr. Narendra Modi and Mr. Sushil Modi and a whole lot of BJP leaders are no longer the old Banya Brahmin castes, that has given a great fillip to this sense of mobility. Any party which is dynamic and offers that mobility, and I think the BJP today is seen as a much more dynamic party than the Congress or other parties. That could change.
Moving on, Badshah Sen, beyond how the message regarding identity politics versus aspirational politics is a new message suggesting a new politics, there are also messages from Maharashtra and Haryana regarding the parties themselves and their performance. For instance, Yogendra Yadav, once again writing in the Indian Express, says of Congress, wherever the Congress has fallen below a 20% vote share, it has not recovered. And he cites Tamil Nadu, West Bengal, Bihar and Uttar Pradesh. Now this time its vote share in Maharashtra was just 17.9. It was marginally above 20% in Haryana, 20.6. Do you get the feeling that Congress is writing itself out of the political frame in these two states, or are we jumping the gun?
Well, I think a bit, again, I'll go along with this phrase that Manini used, a bit of both. The point is that the Congress is now finding itself at the opposite end of the political spectrum. At one point of time, it was Tina. There was no alternative. And there was an index of opposition unity which tended to favor the Congress, opposition disunity, if I may. So now what has happened is, now that it's been pushed below that 20%, I agree with what Yogendra Yadav says, it's going to find it difficult. The only way it can do so is to follow in the footsteps of the BJP and start teaming up with other parties in order to, and not just the NCP, it'll have to look for new allies, because as we heard just now in the discussion, aspirations are changing, caste equations are changing, the urban-rural divide is also changing. So the Congress has to reinvent itself, and the only way it can do so is first get rid of the family, quite frankly. And the second point, which I don't know how it's going to do that, and the second point is it has to find other forms of alliances.
But are you also disagreeing with Yogendra Yadav's suggested conclusion that just as the Congress has ceased to matter and count in Tamil Nadu, West Bengal, Bihar and Uttar Pradesh, it will similarly cease to count in Maharashtra and Haryana? There you disagree. You think it can still recover?
Yeah, I would, because I think there is always a space for a Congress, don't know what you can call it, but a Congress type of political formation, there is space for that.
Shekhar Gupta, what about the MNS? It had 13 seats, it's reduced to just 1. It's a major blow for that party. Beyond the question whether in fact that party can survive, even if it does survive, do you think this is the end of the road for Raj Thackeray's anti-UP, anti-Bihar politics?
I think it should also be the end of the road for Raj Thackeray's antics, which a lot of the media, particularly TV, thrived on, because he gave everybody free entertainment. He made his living and his fame by insulting journalists on camera. He was very polite off camera. So I think, in fact, I am very surprised how a man like him and how a party like his got the kind of airtime and attention, not just from the media, but also from the elites, particularly in Bombay, that it did. Because there was no way in hell he was ever going to replace the force that Shiv Sena was.
Don't bullies attract attention disproportionately to their actual importance?
No, attracting attention is one thing, but there was insufficient disapproval of his methods.
But do you think now those methods have lost their validity, whatever validity they have?
One good deputy commissioner of police, empowered deputy commissioner of police, could have dealt with this. Going and holding any toll booth to ransom, burning something.
But you're looking backwards. Look forward. Does that sort of politics still have a future in Maharashtra?
Well, I think the message of this election is that it's not, that Maharashtra is also changing, Bombay is changing.
Okay. What about the emergence, Javed Ansari, of the MIM? No one really thought that they would contest in Maharashtra, which they did. No one then thought they would win, but they won 2 seats and they came second in 2 more. What does that suggest to you?
Well, it suggests that there is a certain amount of lack of confidence in nationalist parties, especially in the Congress party. The Congress has fallen between 2 stools. The BJP and the others, the NDA accuses it of appeasing Muslims. As far as the Muslims are concerned, they believe the Congress has not done enough, especially in a state like Maharashtra. The largest number of arrests of Muslim youngsters has been in the state of Maharashtra, not in Gujarat. And this is something that the Congress party needs to introspect and answer. And this is the kind of disaffection that the likes of MIM are feeding on. And they will continue to do so till the Congress. The main problem with the Congress party is lack of conviction. They never do anything out of conviction. Whether it is a measure like such a commission, they will not follow it through, or whether it is opposing something. It's always done. It's always done for expediency.
Disappointment and disillusionment with Congress NCP promises that is providing the fodder or the ground for the MIM to flourish.
Absolutely.
Let's widen one step further, Akar Patel. I want to pick up on that thought that Vandita mentioned a moment ago, the changing balance between regional and national parties. Now, both Haryana and Maharashtra have seen regional parties being defeated by fairly sizable margins by a national party. Would you extrapolate this to say that we're coming into a period where there is in fact a significant shift away from regional parties and regional politics in that sense towards national parties and national politics?
In Maharashtra, I would say no, and that it has always been a state where the national has dominated the regional to a very large extent. I don't think the NCP is different either in terms of its vote base or in terms of its outlook than the Congress is. I think the Shiv Sena is different. I think breaking with the BJP will be nasty for the Shiv Sena. It will. There is an element of sobriety that association with the BJP brings to the Sena, which will go both with the Sena and with the NCP. I think that being out of power, losing will mean that they will go back to their old ways, which is nastiness, violence, negativeness, banning things, breaking things. That is what they used to. I think generally speaking, that will survive, and I think that will thrive. I don't think that I'm not as sanguine as Shekhar is. I think that there will be a return to that sort of politics, whether you call it regional or politics or whether you call it hooliganism in Bombay, and I think you will see that back very soon.
Vandita, Akar Patel is not so convinced of the changing balance between regional and national parties as we thought was witnessed in Maharashtra and Haryana. I want to pursue that point because it was a thought first raised by you by putting it like this. The BJP believes we will see that shift away from regional towards national parties happening when Jammu and Kashmir goes to the polls, when Jharkhand happens. Analysts say that if the uncertain future of the AIA-DMK and the DMK continues, you could see the BJP playing a much stronger role in Tamil Nadu, and many believe that's already happening in Assam. So would you agree with one of the headlines of your rival paper, The Times of India, which said today, and I'm quoting, "As BJP rises, the sun may set on regional parties"?
I think these obituaries are too hastily written. There is, for now, a perfect storm that is working for Modi. That is true. He symbolizes the need for change. He symbolizes upward mobility. He symbolizes a departure from a discredited style of Congress government and politics, both. But I would hesitate to say that this marks the end of the regional parties. In fact, what it does present is a challenge to them. In fact, you mentioned two pieces that the Indian Express carried today. There is another piece that we are carrying tomorrow, a piece by Shivanand Tiwari, who was a senior socialist leader, who is a senior socialist leader in Bihar, associated at one time with the RJD, then with the JDU, now outside both, who says that the regional leaders have to learn that Tughlaqi ways will not run anymore. They cannot run their party and their government in the old Tughlaqi way, self-enclosed in their importance, not in touch with the changing voter. Okay. So I think that is the challenge for the regional party, and it's possible that regional parties will rise to it.
Let me put, in a sense, Manani, the opposite of the line I'm taking. I took it with both Akar and with Vandita when I suggested that the trend from Maharashtra and Haryana is away from regional towards national parties. What about the message from the by-elections in Bihar, where JDU, RJD and Congress allied to check BJP, or the message from the by-elections in UP, where the Samajwadi Party, assisted by the fact that BSP abstained, again checked the BJP? Is that an example of regional parties reversing the trend in favor of national, or is that just going to look as an attempt to hold it up for a while, but not actually reverse it?
No, I think that there are regional parties and regional parties. To a point, what she talked about, the Tughlaqi style, I think that people are getting really nauseated with the fact that, I mean, there is the dynastic politics in Congress, but it's much worse in the regional parties that, you know, you have 5 MPs from Samajwadi Party and all of them are from Mulayam Singh's party, and when there's a by-election, it again goes to the party. So at some level...
It again goes to the family.
Again goes to the family. Lalu is bringing his clan in.
Chautala,
you know, we saw... So there is... I think there is a kind of disgust in people about this naked nepotism. It's not even sort of, you know...
So if I understand you correctly, you're saying not that regionals are being reversed, but the nature of regionals and the nature of authority will change.
No, and also I think that everything's going well for the BJP today, you know, but nothing lasts forever. And if the Congress does not revive, there will be opposition to the BJP, and I find the chances of regional parties opposing the BJP in their strongholds is going to be much... it has a greater chance than a 2 national party scenario, which a lot of people hope for.
I accept Manani's warning that nothing lasts forever. We're simply discussing the balance between regional and national at this moment of time, when the BJP looks dominant and the regionals look as they've suffered. Who knows what will happen a year or 2 down the road. But as of today, there are 2 regional parties that look as if they have bastions, that look impregnable: Bengal and Orissa. Let's take Bengal first. Mamata may have won 34 out of 42 Lok Sabha seats, but the BJP won an astonishing 17% vote share, and then it's won a critical assembly seat just a couple of weeks ago. What are the chances that the next time the state goes to the polls, the BJP can push that vote share up from 17 to 25, maybe even 30? They've done equally dramatic things, say, in Haryana, and seriously challenge Mamata, perhaps even defeat Mamata. Or is that just impossible to think of?
I don't think they defeat Mamata, but surely the first part of what you said is correct, that their vote share will rise. And the fact remains, states like West Bengal have had a national party in the shape of the Congress, which has faded away, and the BJP is occupying that space. I think if you look at the political marketplace, if I may say so, the political market space in India seems to be able to support just one national force.
At a time.
At a time. And that national force at this moment of time is the BJP. It then has subnational forces, a marketplace which has subnational forces represented by the regional parties such as Mamata Banerjee and Jayalalitha and so on and so forth. The regional parties will be there. And regional aspirations, Karan, I might point out to you, have not been fulfilled. Regional within Haryana, there are aspirations in large chunks of Haryana which Huda failed to fulfill. There are still regional aspirations there. There is a regional aspiration in Vidarbha, in Maharashtra.
Nationals can acquire those and fulfill them and come to power.
Yes, yes.
Let's come to that other bastion, Shekhar. It's Orissa, where the Chief Minister is a good friend of yours. The BJD in May won 20 out of 21 seats. It won 117 out of 147 Vidhan Sabha seats, and that was its best performance in 4 consecutive elections. Yesterday, they won the Kandhamal by-election with a 3 lakh majority. Do you get the feeling that Orissa, unlike perhaps Bengal, will be a very difficult nut for the BJP to crack?
Most certainly, because the formula that Modi has used this time in Maharashtra and Haryana cannot work in Odisha, because in Odisha they have a very strong leader who they trust. So unless he can produce another local leader to challenge Patnaik, it's not going to happen. People will not switch to voting for Modi and trusting him with appointing a leader for them. I think Naveen has that loyalty. But even about West Bengal, I think what's going to happen now is that BJP increasingly will replace Congress party as the non-left opposition in West Bengal. The party that will really decline is the left front, because Mamta is left of the left front. Mamta's product differentiation is very, very clear. She's left of the left front. In fact, she positioned herself to the left of the left front when the left was trying to move closer to the center. So there is room for a party at the other end of the pole. Congress is not that party. Congress is simply not organized.
So BJP can be the national party that wins back power in Bengal after 30-40 years.
It will be tough to win back power in Bengal because of the
but threaten Mamta seriously.
Demographics, because of left loyalties which are being transferred to Mamta, including the left goons, right? So Assam is a slightly different story, because Assam is a straight story of polarization now.
Quite right.
And Muslim vote in Assam is divided between Ajmal and the Congress party, which is not the case in Bengal.
Let me pick up on that tantalizing phrase that was used by Bacha Sen when he said that the Indian marketplace can only sustain one national party at a time. Do you get the feeling that in fact the national party that's reviving is the BJP? That's the party that's pushing back regional parties, whether it's in Haryana and Maharashtra, whether it's going to happen in Jharkhand and Jammu and Kashmir. Not Congress. In fact, Congress got battered by TRS and TDP in Andhra as well as in Telangana, and it's been shattered in Maharashtra where it's come third, equally in Haryana where it's come third. Is the BJP now that one party that the market can sustain, not the Congress?
Well, based on the current political situation, without doubt, the Congress has a mountain to climb, and there are no signs that they've even begun climbing it. And if things continue this way, this is an existentialist question for the Congress party. The Congress is right now fighting for survival, and unless they do something really drastic and they get their act together, which is easier said than done, the Congress is really staring down the barrel.
So if this was a play, you can see the curtain falling on the last act of Congress? It's as dramatic as that?
Almost as bad.
Manni?
Well, I think the Congress party has been around for over 100 years, and it, so to and its obituaries.
125 actually.
Yeah, I know, and its obituaries have been written many times. But what
it's
is
never
true,
been this bad. It's never ever been
I
this
think
bad.
The Congress. It is not about the national parties. It is how dynamic a national party is, or how dynamic a regional party is. The problem with the Congress is that it has not been able to give the kind of leadership at the regional level, which it used to under Nehru. I mean, it was only Mrs. Indira Gandhi's time that it was destroyed. If you take the example
but that was 40 years ago as well.
No, but I'm saying that if you take the example of, say, a man like Siddharamaiah, he was not from the Congress, he was from the Janata Dal, he was a regional party, he was adopted by the Congress, given a free hand. So in Maharashtra, for instance, Maharashtra can either go the Gujarat and Madhya Pradesh way, or it can go the Karnataka way. The Congress has to, I don't think it's curtains in Maharashtra yet, because Congress
Okay, what
has
you're saying is this
roots.
is a turning point.
Yeah,
right?
and the Congress,
it could completely disappear or it could revive.
Congress was the main template. Every party has come out from the Congress template, so to speak. So the Congress can
But not quite the
actually,
BJP.
Not the BJP.
But the BJP, a lot of what the BJP has followed post, 80s.
Look, let me bring you in, Akar Patel. We're talking about whether or not today the dominant national party is the BJP. Clearly, at this moment in time, it is. The question is, how much more dominant will the BJP become? How much will Congress seem to shrink as we look down the next 2-3 years? For instance, at the moment, if you look at the number of states the two national parties control, Congress has a very small slight edge. Even after losing Maharashtra and Haryana, it still controls 8 to BJP's 7. But if you look at what could happen in Jharkhand, later Bihar, then Assam, the BJP's tally could go to 10 and Congress could slide down towards 3 and 4. So as you look down the road, 3, 4, 5 years, do you see the BJP establishing itself for a good 5-10 year horizon as the dominant party and Congress slinking and shrinking back?
I think there are two separate things. I think the states that the Congress holds on to are mainly the minor states, most of them in the northeast. I think if you look at the heartland, North India, Northwest India, the BJP has held on to states for a very long time. Gujarat, the Congress hasn't won in 30 years. Madhya Pradesh, 15 years. Rajasthan once in 15 years, Chhattisgarh 15 years. I think the problem for the BJP will come in the demonstration when Mr. Modi finds at the end of his current tenure that 9% growth year on year is not possible, that peace with Pakistan on your terms is not really possible, that China will continue to play a mischief on the northeast and you can't really help it, that India can't go and clobber the world the way it wants to. I think when all those realities come to bear, it will be in exactly the same position, 282 seats or not, that the Manmohan Singh government was 5 years ago. At that point, the Congress has a chance to claw back. Having said that, it needs to have some degree of a presence in the states. If it continues to lose states in the way it has, the Gandhis' stupidity, their hubris, giving away Maharashtra, it will be very difficult to optimize, to make use of that.
Okay.
Modi's weaknesses will come. They came in Maharashtra. He won with 28% of the vote. He should not have. The Congress should know when the time is to pounce. I think the Gandhis ought to be told or ought to know themselves that there will be a moment of weakness, which is the moment to strike.
All right, we have a very interesting situation where everyone believes that in fact there is a dominant party at the moment, but whether it will stay the dominant party for the foreseeable future, whether Congress can claw back, is still something that is open for grabs. Congress has the capacity to revive if it has the will and if it has the leadership. Those are big question marks. Take a break at that point. When we come back, let's try and look deeper down at some of the political and economic consequences that are only suggested, but sometimes very clearly suggested by what happened yesterday in Maharashtra and Haryana. How much will that change not just the Indian political scene, but possibly also the economic scene? Stick with us. We'll be back in a couple of minutes.